Hello, Froggers. Frog review. Frog time. Finally. Today we'll be going over the GeonWorks Frog TKL, which is an enthusiast entry-level TKL made by Geon in Korea. Now I've got the black unit here because Geon consistently sends me black units, even though I have the sweatiest, most terrible hands in the hobby. So, yeah. In any case, it is a fairly low profile, 6-degree typing angle TKL with the A88 layout. It's an 88C PCB, but the layout is A88. It's got a relatively low front height, but an adjusted front height of about 20 millimeters. And the whole thing is made out of 6063 aluminum with some big old brass weights and a very interesting plate design, as well as a new twist on top mounting. Now, this keyboard, last I checked, is going to cost about $285, excluding the PCB. However, this may be up to $20 more in the future. We'll see about that. And essentially, this is an unlimited sale forever, or so Geon says. This means that there will be a certain amount sold every month until the end of time. So it comes in a variety of plate materials. I've got the aluminum version here, and it comes in a variety of colors like silver, black, dark green, navy, purple, burgundy, red. But what I've got here, of course, is the classic black. Thank you, Geon. Anyway, intro. And here we are with the case externals. Before we get into that, Geon sent me this unit against my will. He sent me a black unit, even though I have the worst hands in the hobby. This is a review unit, a pre-production review unit, so there might be some very, 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 very slight changes, perhaps. And this will go back to Geon after the review is done, unless I choose to pay for the unit in full, which I might end up not doing, interestingly enough. And not because it's not a good keyboard, but just because it's not a keyboard for me. And that might be the situation for a lot of you as well. So anyway, we'll start with the basics. Nothing interesting going on up top. There's no engravings, there's no badges. I like that, it's nice and simple. We've got generic Korean bezels of about 8 millimeter, 5 millimeter, 5 millimeter. And then this looks a lot smaller than 8 millimeter because of the chamfer right here. And if we actually take a close look using the macro cam, which will zoom, focus. All right, there we go. So right around here, this is about 16 millimeters at the lowest point, and it goes up to about 17.3. And then right when the first keycap starts, when taking the feet into account, it's about 20 millimeters. So relatively low profile. And the back of the board is also relatively low profile as well. This sits a tiny bit higher than my KFE, but in the hand it feels significantly smaller. Not much going on. We see that this is a standard A88 layout. That means it'll be compatible with a whole bunch of PCBs because it doesn't come with one by default. And yeah, that's the top. Let's take a look at the side profile. Side profile is actually quite interesting. Again, I'm only going to apologize once for my fingerprints. So there is an exaggerated seam right here where you can get about half a millimeter of nail in there. But it is decently wide, so exaggerated seam. I like my exaggerated seams. It's a pretty good design aesthetic. And right here, we've got a slice that's just cut right out of the bottom. This allows you to grab it, which is nice. A lot of boards suffer from the fact that you just can't grab them from the side. This one goes as wide as possible, unlike a Jane, for example, where the bottom will be like this, and then you'll have a whole empty area where you can grab it by the sides. This essentially goes almost to full width, and still allows you to grab it a little bit. So this exaggerated seam goes all the way around the board. Including the front and including the back. The back is a little bit tighter compared to the others. But yeah, here on the back, again, nothing interesting, no engravings, nothing crazy. USB-C port. With this PCB, it is almost flush. It's inset about 1.1 millimeters, and that's including the small curvature of the port. Right here, because there is a very, very small chamfer in the port externals. This is fairly standard. This looks like about a 0.5 or a 0.75 chamfer in terms of depth. And that allows you to make the port seem a little bit more flush than it actually is, and it also aids in getting it in the hole. Classic. Here we got the back of the unit. The back of the unit is pretty self-explanatory. We've got removable feet, which also hide the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws that hold the case together. I am a big fan of having 6 screws to put together a TKL. A TKL does not need 10 screws, it does not need 12 screws, it does not need 8 screws. And having removable feet like these that just slot into place when you just push down on them gently allows you to also hide your screws without having to make the internal case complexity so much higher and the machining cost so much higher by doing a more mainstream screwless design. I much prefer this because the end effect is exactly the same, and it is cheaper, better, easier to assemble, and easier to machine. Now, these are a nice rubber, nice and stretchy. Once you've got them in place, and they are reversible, by the way, so I can put this one here and that one here, and I can put it upside down like I'm doing right now. Can I put it upside down? Maybe not. I cannot put it upside down. Okay. So they are interchangeable, but they are not reversible. So let's put it all in there, and these actually do a really good job of keeping the board from sliding around too much. So that is nice and firm. For reference, if I were to flip it, even though I've got 88 switches, I can still move this around. Anyway, here we can see the brass weight. Now, there's 2 brass weights, interestingly enough, and we'll get into that as soon as we get into the case internals. Now, what I really like about this brass weight is there's a tiny little chamfer. These are the design elements that I really, really love from Geon. And we can take a peek on the macro cam. Check that out. See how that's ever so slightly chamfered? So it's not completely flush, and once again, you can get your nail in there, and you can see a little bit of dust got in there. But from a design choice, it's something that I really appreciate. It makes the board a little bit more friendly visually. And it is the Frog, and the name was chosen kind of as a joke, but it is a very friendly board, and I mean that in a lot of ways. It is visually friendly, and it's also friendly from a budget standpoint for people trying to get into and own an entry-level, enthusiast-level keyboard. One interesting thing about this weight is you can see how just my fingers will destroy this aluminum, and it's just sweat. It wipes right off. This brass weight is actually coated with a ceramic coating in order to prevent the brass from patinaing or turning brown and eventually blue. I've been testing this thoroughly for about a month now, and I've been touching it with my terrible greasy fingers, and I have managed to stain it just a little bit. So I might actually hold on to this keyboard for like another 3 to 4 weeks and just continue touching it whenever I can and see what happens, because I've got very special hands. I've touched like a Mac Pro and literally like corroded through a piece of metal just with my hands. So not at once. It took like a year or 2, and then I checked it out and I saw a big old handprint in there. But this has survived me thus far. I've been touching it, I've licked it. Tasted kind of weird, but this means through normal everyday use, aka not having terrible hands and not touching your weight literally 20 times a day, this will actually stay looking like clean brass, hopefully for years, if not forever. All right, what else have we got for the externals? That's pretty much it. The externals of this are painfully simple. The edges are all nicely rounded. Basically everything is chamfered and rounded. Right here, small little chamfer. Look at the edge, small little chamfer. Let's look at the front. It's got a chamfer that goes into a fillet, into a chamfer. It's pretty cool. And then the internal radii right here are super smooth as well. And if we look at the blocker, we can see that it is more of a Korean style blocker. That means you do have harder edges, but even these hard edges have been smoothed out ever so slightly. To be fair, this is a little pointy on the fingers, but everything has been smoothed out a little bit, and I appreciate that smoothing that Geon does. I appreciate the small little attention to detail and basically every little portion of the keyboard. This is something that we saw during the F1 review, and the F1 obviously is a completely different beast, but you could tell that there was a large attention to detail. Anyway, let's open this up, look at the internals, look at the plate, look at the mounting, look at all that stuff. Now, disassembly is actually really easy. Now, I've only got 2 screws in here, just to save time during the video. So I've only screwed in this one and this one. And it just simply comes apart. But before it comes apart, we've got the most important part of every Simon keyboard review, without exception, and that is the screw review. As a matter of fact, Geon was kind enough to send me a lot of screws, mainly because the first screws he sent me were the wrong size. Let's get some more screws. Oh yeah, baby. Oh, love me the screw review. Honestly, I want to just quit keyboard reviews and just review screws until the end of time. All right, there we are. Now, they're all very clean. I found no gunk in any of the screw taps of the keyboard, though I have heard some other reviewers, because like 100 different people got this board, had a little bit of filth in their screw taps, just a little bit, but nothing like, you know, groundbreaking. These are all stainless steel screws from what I can tell. Coating on them looks nice and clean. None of them are stripping. Every single screw is knurled. Why is it knurled? It doesn't need to be knurled, but I'm down. I'm 100% down for knurled screws. These are great screws. These are probably in my top 3 keyboard screws thus far. Obviously, number 1 was the Zephyr, but these do pretty darn well. There are 2 lengths of screws. There are 2 lengths of screws for assembling this board, and that's a good thing. This allows all the screws to essentially sit at the same height once inserted. So what I mean by that is if we only had this type of screw, this screw would sit very far down inside the case. And then you would run into the issue where if you don't have a screwdriver like this with just a perfectly long tip, you'd end up scratching the hell out of your screw hole area, notably in your corners. This is a problem with boards like the Jaguar, for example, which I scratched the hell out of trying to use my iFixit kit. Pro tip, never use an iFixit kit for a keyboard because the tip is not long enough. Therefore, you end up scratching it all up. Okay, that's enough screw talk. Let's open her up. Alrighty, let's start with the disassembly procedure. Now, this is a top-mounted board, and top-mounted means that the plate mounts to the top. Now, generally, you would have to undo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different screws to get this plate off. With this board, however, you can just press down. There we go, it's done. So this uses tadpoles, which we can take a look at. So the general idea of the tadpole is the tadpole simply replaces your screw. So instead of screwing through the plate into the case top, what you can do, get in nice and close here, what you can do is basically just shove it in the hole. There you go. Tadpole just goes in the hole. Now, everybody who's heard about these tadpoles was like, oh my god, it's going to change everything. It's going to feel and sound so different and all that. It feels like a top mount. It sounds like a top mount. The benefit to these are the quick assembly and disassembly and the ease of assembling it the first time. And also allowing you a little bit of flexibility of choosing which tadpoles you want in your case. Now, when I had originally built it and used it for the first 3 weeks, I had all 10 or all 12, all 12 tadpoles in here. And quite recently, when I rebuilt it after lubing all the switches, I pulled out the 4 in the center. Did it have a massive effect on sound and feel? Nope. So it's up to you to do your own tuning if you think more or less tadpoles are for you, but TLDR, it feels like a top mount keyboard. It sounds like a top mount keyboard. Okay, so we will start with the case top. You can already see some pretty interesting things in here. Fairly light, obviously. It is a top. There isn't much going on here. The height of the top case is very low. Of course, the height of the entire keyboard is relatively low. The internal finishing looks pretty good, and we can see milled areas for all of the plate mounts as well as the case mount screws right there. We also see two small little alignment tabs right here, and that's for alignment or preventing movement in this axis. Pretty cool. Now, from here, we don't see anything that prevents movement in this axis, but that's something on the case bottom. If you look very closely, you can see that, yes, this is where the plate does go. However, a little piece of the bottom also holds onto the plate. It's easier to just show you. Yeah. Alrighty, case bottom. Right there. See that? This little ledge? This little ledge essentially helps hook into this area here and the sister area here at the bottom. I don't see much going on here on the case top. Not much interesting. The only thing that shocks me is I see no hook marks for the anodization. Normally you'll see some discoloration around one or multiple holes where essentially this thing was dipped into the anodization bath. None here. It means that they likely, use something in the hole and then, for example, like, screw in the hole and then dip it via the screw, or something a little bit more advanced. The important thing is no hook marks here on the top. Top is actually very, very boring. One thing we didn't talk about is the finishing, because this finishing is black. It's fine. It's fine black. No banding, no splashing, no weirdness. For black ano, it's okay. I have a problem with it because my hands are literally the worst. All right, next. We've got the case bottom. This case bottom is actually very interesting. The more you look at it, the more you see. First of all, we can see the little tabs right here that are meant to go into the top to prevent lateral motion. And then obviously these right here to prevent this type of motion. This means that without screwing the top into the bottom, there's very little movement. Like, I'm moving my desk more than I'm moving the board. It's ever so slight, and that's just tolerances when manufacturing. All right, we see a big old weight, and this is actually the thing that completely changes this board, because this board at $300 or sub $300 without a PCB, with a weight this large, is amazing. If a weight this large was in a $450 keyboard, that would be good. If a weight like this was in a $600 keyboard, that'd be average. Average to good. What we've got here is actually two different weights. So from the outside, we see the external weight. So there is a external weight, which is this one right here. And then we've got an internal weight, which is this bigger one right here. And we'll actually disassemble it, because I find this super, super interesting. Note right here is that this hex driver works for both the case screws as well as the weights, which is actually super nice. So you only need one tool, which I believe is a, what, 2.5? I'm going to assume so. It feels like a 2.5. Now, this weight is like exceptionally chunky. And while we're disassembling it, we'll talk about the price point. I think at this price point, reviews don't even matter. This is a stellar value TKL just because of this weight. Ignoring everything else, just looking at the size of the weight and looking at the price point, this is a no-brainer buy. Even if this thing sounded and felt terrible, it would still be a fantastic value, which is what I care about most on this channel. All right, let's pull this weight out. So this is our internal weight. It's heavy. It's a big boy. Like you could definitely take someone out with this. So the screws are actually recessed, so they sit completely flat once they're in there. It's pretty cool. And then we've got the external weight. Now the external weight is a through weight, so I can just lift this up, and here we are. So this is the frog weight. And if we take a look at the size, it's essentially milled from a single bar, probably much larger than this, but approximately this size. And it's got all these little very interesting cutouts that were not at all necessary to hold it in place. And then tie into the secondary weight, which does come at an angle, you can tell here. So they don't sit perfectly flush because of the way the case bottom, well, the case bottom has an angle to it, like all case bottoms. So we got a little piece of engraved aluminum right here. Quite nice. One very interesting thing to note is generally when you're getting into case internals, you start seeing, you know, some discrepancies in the anodization and whatnot. With this board, nope, still flawless. Like just random dust in here, but still flawless. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this anodization anywhere. Now, of course, this is black. It's relatively hard to mess up black, but I've seen it done. So that's the weight. The weights alone are huge. Now, this is approximately the size of weight that's in the Singer KBD Jaguar, and that board was $600. This board is under $300. So let's put this back in, line up the bottom. There we are, and we can simply screw it into place. As a matter of fact, the price point for this keyboard is so scary, and I love what it represents for the future of this hobby. I strongly recommend people buying this board as an entry-level board, and I strongly recommend it, like, you know, big boys that are looking for proper enthusiast grade boards. We're talking like TGRs, key cult, stuff like that. If you're one of those guys, this board is probably not for you. But what this board represents is great, because if it is technically feasible to produce a keyboard like this for under $300 and sell it to the end customer for under $300. That means that the value when looking at other boards, no matter how good said boards are, boards that are at $400, $500, $600, this just absolutely destroys them from a value perspective. Now, obviously, from a design perspective, those boards could have something that you find really interesting that's not necessarily in this board. That's pretty cool. But I think that this is the first chapter, or this board is part of the first chapter towards a greater change in this community, where higher end keyboard makers will be pushed to improve their pricing, because a lot of high-end keyboard makers generally gravitate to a small subsection of manufacturers that more or less have a smallish monopoly on keyboard production because they do so well, and they've been increasing their prices little by little, and that little by little has become significantly more expensive. No other maker currently, with the exception of Geon, could have produced a keyboard with this many materials, finished this well at this price point. Killer value. And I hope that this pushes for some improvement for keyboard designers and makers to go out and find a better way to produce their keyboards for cheaper. Because in the end, that means for us, the customers, we're gonna get better value. But if no one pushes for the change and improvement, then keyboard prices are just going to keep on rising little by little. Before you know it, we're spending $800 on a basic TKL such as this instead of the $300. Again, fantastic. Now, obviously, a lot of people will say, "Oh, but Geon is literally the manufacturer, and he's not a designer or whatever. He doesn't have to. There is no middleman," and that's great. That's capitalism. You should always seek to cut out the middleman. Anyway, here on the case bottom, we've got a few small little things to cover. We've got these little ridges here, which are quite interesting. These are to prevent the material from getting too thin around here, because this angle keeps going down and down and down, and eventually your material, your aluminum, is going to be so thin that it might bend, it might break during machining. Something bad might happen. So it's ever so slightly raised and stepped up in these little steps right here. Now, we've seen this before in a lot of boards that essentially have a very, very low profile near the front, and this is a very good way of managing it. Again, we look at the finishing, fantastic. Even with like these tiny little steps right here. I assume a lot of you are asking yourselves, what are these for, Simon? These are interesting. And yeah, they are. So when I first assembled this board, I tried to assemble it like a normal board. I took the plate and I shoved it in the top. But apparently, that's actually not smart, because then you're essentially pushing the tadpoles out as you're pushing in, right? That won't get you a nice firm seal. The way that this board is meant to be built is you essentially just put it down and you come in with the top, and the top, using the alignment tabs, will essentially push straight down, pushing the tadpoles into the top, using the bottom to essentially hold the tadpole. So press down, there we go. I pull up, it's connected. Very cool. So basically, the tadpoles sit right here on each of these little grooves, and as you push the top down, you're pushing the plate into the tadpoles, which then latch on. So there are very, very small latches on the tadpole right there, where you can see where the plate is supposed to be. These little grooves are meant to, I assume, keep the plate from going too high or going too low. Very, very cool. All right, and let us finally take a look at the plate. This plate, as a lot of you may have noticed, has a lot of memes. This is a lot of memes. So there's some leaf spring mechanisms, some more than others. So this area right here is a leaf spring mechanism because of the distance between the mounting point and its touching point of the rest of the plate. Pretty much the same all around. Now this is a 5052 aluminum, if I remember correctly, H32, and it does give you a tiny little bit of bounce if you were to put a significant amount of force into it. But I'll be honest with you, this did nothing for me, especially considering the leaf spring gasket that was in the F1. This just feels like a top mount. There's a lot of flex cuts here on the F-Row as well as the Alphas. In terms of actually getting flex out of this, there's no way in hell I'm getting any flex out of this. Like, I can hear the solder trying to like break the switches off the PCB. These mostly would be for acoustics and just for memes. If these added some sort of inherent and, you know, helpful value, then I would swear by them, but this feels like a standard top mount plate. And I've had other people type on this and they've told me the same thing. Oh, it just feels like a top mount. And it is. It is a top mount. Could this have been made slightly cheaper by not doing all of the memes? Yeah. But you wouldn't have gotten the same acoustics. So there is that. Keep in mind, there are a lot of plate materials. Now, for this particular aluminum plate, you're not getting much flex out of it because it is aluminum. But if you were to be going with something like polycarbonate, for example, with all these cuts, assuming 1.5 millimeter polycarbonate and using, for example, a 1.2 millimeter PCB instead of a 1.6, you could probably get some decent flex out of this. But with a standard thickness PCB, a 1.6, and the aluminum plate, although it's got all of these meme holes all over the place, it just feels like a standard top mount. And it sounds like a standard top mount. Now, this is generally the part where we talk about the PCB. It doesn't come with a PCB. What do I think of that? I think that's great. I think that's fantastic. One, it opens the doors to specialization, which means, you know, it opens the doors to choice and specialization. So first of all, choice. You could go out and buy a super cheap $25 PCB, like a Fave 87C, for example. Don't do that. They're terrible. You could get, you know, a very nice Heine 88C. Cool. There are alternative layouts. The Frog does come in a standard A87 layout, so that means it has no F13 key and uses a far more standard TKL layout. And for those, you can use pretty much any A87 compatible PCB as long as it has USB-C. So I like giving the customer the choice. However, I wish that a lot more types of PCBs were consistently in stock. And I think it opens the door to specialization where, you know, somebody can literally just, you know, make a living making bottom of the barrel $25 PCBs and selling them, because if you don't care about, you know, the functionality, you can just get whatever PCB you want. And if you want something super crazy, you can buy, you know, like a Heine, or if Wilba ever designs a 88C compatible PCB, that'll probably be like the highest and craziest one. And if you know, want like crazy features like per key RGB, that'll probably be your go-to. So I like the fact that the PCB is not included because it gives people choice. We're not at the point where where I'm happy with the current state of PCBs. Like I want to just be able to buy a Heine 88C right now and have it shipped to my door. Unfortunately, that's not how this hobby works. Maybe someday will be a large enough hobby and a large enough community where we can have actual stock of a wide range of PCBs available. And that'll be nice. I think that this board is a good first step to that, because this is a fantastic board for sub $300. If this board was $450, it would be a great board. If this board was $500, it would be a good board. If this board was $600, this would be an okay to slightly below average board. Though, to be fair, I'm not harping on the quality, the finishing, or the design of this particular keyboard. I think this keyboard is for people that are buying their first high-end enthusiast TKL. I think if you already own an F1, or if you plan to buy an F2, or you want to get some Janes, or some key cults, or some, nice, Jaime TKLs, get some nice high-end Korean stuff. This is not for you. This is not the board for you. It's not bad. This is a good top mount keyboard, but it doesn't do anything special. Sure, it's got the tadpoles, and maybe those will be slightly more useful with different types of plates. But to me, it's still just a standard top mount. So let's put it together. And just talk about the Frog. Now, generally, my keyboard reviews will have a sound test. This keyboard review will not have a sound test for a variety of reasons. One, I don't like the way that my unit sounds, and sound tests, as shown in a previous video, are not at all reliable. Reason number two is my current audio recording equipment is not really well tailored to actually do sound tests. So in the future, when I can get a better microphone set to do more accurate sound tests, I will. But going forward, no sound test, because with my current setup, every single keyboard sounds like a keyboard. You don't get the finer details of it. So I will stick to my guns on the very important fact that if you are an enthusiast and you've got lots of boards, please don't buy the Frog. Don't buy it now. Maybe buy it down the line, because I think that this is a very good barrier to entry for people coming into the hobby and actually getting a taste of what a proper good keyboard is. Now, there are some alternatives at this price point with things like the Friar TKL, for example, and Canon keys like lower spec boards like the Devastating, I assume it's called the Devastating TKL. From a value perspective, this destroys everything. Nobody can compete with this at this price point. However, if you're looking for something fun, no. This is a nice, dependable, good quality keyboard. This is a good daily driver. This is not your supercar. This is not a luxury car. This is not a limousine. It's not pushing any boundaries. The one boundary that it is pushing is obviously the price point. And I think that this should be everyone's first TKL. If this was my first TKL, it would have opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I would have been far less forgiving to other boards that I had paid so much for. Because when I consider the fact that this was $300, or let's say, $325 with a PCB, you can't compete. Nobody can compete. So this will push for change. That's great. Do I think that this is a good board? Yeah. This is a very good entry-level keyboard. If you're an enthusiast, wait, because Geon said he'll be producing like 200-ish units of these a month. Leave them for the people that will benefit the most. If you've got some nice gasket boards and leaf spring boards, and you're playing with different plate materials and PCB thicknesses and all of that, don't buy this. If you're just getting into the hobby and you're looking for your first TKL, maybe you've got a 60% or a 65 for something, you really want to get a solid TKL for the price point, definitely buy one of these. It's fairly simple. Couple more things to cover. So this thing comes in a case. It's the same case as the F1. That's already a big problem. The F1, like we said before, is a very chunky board. Now this normally only comes with 2 of these. These I added myself for a very good reason. There's a lot of empty space in here, which means when you close it up, yeah, even if you're just like walking to work, this thing's going to be flopping around. I had it in my backpack and it was flopping around. I'm pretty sure Geon is changing the case, but if he's not, just add a couple of these and it keeps it from flopping around as bad. I think that including a case is amazing, and I appreciate every keyboard that includes a case, even though this, you know, isn't the best case on earth. It's totally fine. It means that you don't have to buy a sleeve. It means you don't have to shove it in your backpack unless you want to put the case in your backpack, and it means that you can actually take it with you where you want to go. Now, let's talk about the more, I mean, it's been pretty subjective for a while, but let's get real subjective. I don't think this sounds great. I don't think this feels great. Now, again, I'm talking as somebody that's, you know, that's been part of the super high-end enthusiast community. And this is just, it's not fun to drive. You know how there are some cars that are just really fun to drive? This is not fun to drive. This is your simple, dependable car. Its sound signature is relatively Korean, but a little bit more Western than you'd think. If you're confused by what that means, it's a little bit of a higher pitch, but not as high of a pitch as general Korean keyboards. Things like, you know, the LZCLS or, you know, Lin Whale or any of those guys that sound very, very Korean. So it's a little bit deeper sounding, but it's still relatively high sounding, and I think that's caused mostly by these acoustic cuts. Now, obviously, the switches that you use, the PCB and the plate that you choose, as well as how you mod your switches, will all affect your sound. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of how this particular unit sounds. And I'm pretty sure if you search around YouTube, you'll find plenty of YouTubers that have built it in such a way that makes it seem like that's how you want it to sound, but that's not how sound works. But yeah. In terms of feeling, I'll keep it super simple. It feels like a top mount. It feels like a top mount. That's it. Do the tadpoles do anything? Probably. Does the leaf spring do anything? Probably. It feels like a top mount. I have to put in a dramatic amount of force to see any plate movement. It feels like a top mount. It doesn't feel like a very stiff top mount. It feels like a decently subdued top mount, and I do appreciate that. It's very nice to type on. But it's not bouncy, and it's not flexy in this current build configuration. And of course, I've been spoiled by, you know, polycarbonate half plates and plateless designs and gasketed leaf springs and all of that. This is a top mount. Feels like a top mount. Is that bad, Simon? No, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. That's why I said that this is a great beginner enthusiast board. If you want to know what a good top mount feels like, type on the Frog. If you want to know what a great top mount feels like, then you're gonna have to go up a little bit higher. So, I mean, I've already made this clear whether or not I recommend this board and who I recommend it for, but I like it. Now, I don't want to keep it because it is a good board, but I would prefer to give this board to, you know, somebody that is just entering the hobby. So if I do not send this back to Geon, I will find somebody here locally and I will be giving this to them, obviously after I pay for the unit, because I think that this will open a lot of people's eyes. This is like seeing for the first time if you've never truly had a good board, and you can't beat the price point. You cannot beat the price point. And I've spoken to a lot of people that were like, oh, Simon, but $300 is still a lot of money. Yeah, it is. It is a lot of money. But not for this. Not for this at all. It's not even remotely enough money for what you're getting. So in terms of value, the value is killer. And if you're on the edge and you don't know, go for it. Try for a frog. Definitely try to get a frog. And if you get one, you get one. And if you don't, try again. Obviously, it goes without saying, I don't want to see this thing being flipped on Mech Market for $1,000 like the F1, which was $300 or $320 to $380. If you miss out on your chance to purchase this retail, wait until the next month. They'll make 200 more. And if you miss your chance, wait and they'll make 200 more. That's it. Do not humor the people that are going to attempt to flip this board. This board, like I said, is fantastic value at its price point. But once you start raising that price point, its value drops off substantially. I would not want to pay $400 for this because that completely changes the ideals of this board. At $400, it's good. It is. But at $300, it's excellent. Anyway. Camera. That's my review. If you stuck around to the end, thanks, I guess. Go watch other videos. Go check out other typing tests by YouTubers that actually have decent sound solutions. Maybe you like the sound. I personally didn't, but maybe I just, didn't know how to tune it acoustically the way that I wanted. Anyway, if you like the video, give me a thumb. If you dislike the video, give me the bad thumb. And if you love me long time, hop in the Discord and get into the Twitch streams, which will all be linked below. Anyway, that's the review. I'm out. I was surprised when I originally took it out of its box. Oh no, I forgot to do the fucking thing. Black unit, because for some reason Geon consistently sends me black units, even though I have the worst. Me. Blah, 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 blah. Yes. Hello, froggers. Meep meep. I love titties.